Hello, this is Dee here from Galway Art Academy, and welcome to the second part of our stories project. In the first part, we did an imaginative drawing that you had to create after listening to a story that I read to you. In this part, we're going to be talking about comics. So just for a little recap on what we talked about the last time. So we usually kind of interact or experience stories in these kinds of ways. We might read a story ourselves, or somebody might read one to us. We write stories, but we can also draw a story. And I just think for a few minutes, is there any other ways, in case you haven't done the last lesson, that you might know about that you could experience a story? So you mightn't have thought of some of these, maybe you did some of them. You can speak a story, you could make it up with your friends, you could have a chat together and create your own story. You could even record it, record yourself speaking. But when you think about songs, we have songs that often tell stories. When people sing, they're telling stories. So you could write a story and it could end up being turned into a song. But also on stage, people act stories out, don't they? And sometimes they dance stories. And these things get recorded, and that's where it moves us into kind of film and video recording. And all of these are usually planned on paper before you start. So even if you're interested in movies and maybe becoming a producer of movies, this would be where those kind of people would start. And a lot of that starts with storyboards and comics, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So some of these things that you learned today could be applied to a movie, and we're going to look at some examples of that as well. So part two, planning your own comic. Now we're not just going to draw any old picture, you're going to have to plan your story for the comic, and we're going to look at what you're going to need to do that. So these are the main things that you have to consider. First of all, it's really important to have your characters thought about. So characters up here. I'm going to just put a little line around it there if I can. Oh, it's not working. Hold on. Let's go for a black. Characters. Okay, so who are the people in the story? So you can see I've underlined who, what, where, and when here. I always find it's a really good question to ask yourself if you're trying to come up with any ideas for anything, really. So who would be in the story? You might want to think about how many people. And in the beginning, it's usually good if you're just starting out doing stories, not to have too many people, too many characters in it. Let's just keep it simple to start with till you get really, really good at it. The next thing is the plot. So this is the what will happen in the story. So what are you going to have happen in your story? And the next two, which go nicely together, are the scene or the place. So it's the where and the when. So where will the story take place and when will it take place? And what I mean by that is, where is it going to be? Indoors, outdoors, in the countryside, in the city, in a forest, at the beach? And when? Maybe it's in present day, maybe it's in the future, maybe it's nighttime, maybe it's daytime. You've got to decide these things. So these are the main things I want you to think about just to start out. So your characters, the plot, the scene, or the place that the story takes place. So this little worksheet you can print out and it's available for you with this project, and you can fill in the title of the story. You might not have a title straight away, that might come later when you get some ideas. So the things that we talked about in the last slide you can fill in here. So it says who here, so who are the characters, what's the plot, when did it take place, past, future, day, night, and where. So in these little shapes on this sheet, you can draw your characters if you wanted to, or you could just write some words in here. You don't have to do this very neatly. This is just something to help you get your ideas together. So you could just make a little list of who the characters would be and describe them a little bit. You could just write in the yellow box what's going to happen in the story, what the plot is. So it's up to you, whatever way you're comfortable doing that. And the author you'll see up here, of course, that will be you, your name, because you're the person that's writing the story. So you're the author. Now there's a couple of other things that might help you with your ideas for your story. So other things to think about. I want you to think about the mood of the story. So is it going to be sad or happy? And you can use colours in your images that kind of give off a different mood. So, you know, dark blacks and greys will be kind of moody and sad and dull, whereas bright colours would make you much, much happier. So think about the type of story you'd like to write. Is it going to be a funny story? The type of story here in the green box. Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be fantasy? Something that doesn't exist in the real world, something that you're making up? Is it going to be a scary story? Is it going to be some kind of an adventure? It's really, really up to you. Okay, so these are things to think about and consider in your story, and you can always go back and change things on your worksheet when you have a look at these. Other things I want you to think about, you know, when you're watching movies and cameras move around and they look at different angles, I want to think about you to think about the little squares on your comic as being like you're looking through a camera. So I want you to think about angles. And I want you to think about these different kinds of angles that you can do, because this is what makes stories more interesting. And I have some examples of these now in a few minutes, so don't worry if you don't get it straight away. So you can have a wide angle. This is where the camera goes right back and gives us the whole full scene where we can see everything. Close up, when you zoom in, and usually it can be to somebody's face, so we can see their expression, and their face fills the full frame or the full screen of the television. But these two are very commonly used. We have bird's eye view and worm's eye view. So a bird's eye is like if you were a bird, you're flying in the sky and you're looking down at everything from above. And the worm's eye view is if you're a tiny little worm and you're on the ground and you're really small and you're looking up at everything, everything looks much bigger, but it's looking from below. So here's an example of a bird's eye view. So this bird is flying over this massive city and it can see all the rooftops and everything. So maybe that would be kind of a dramatic scene that you could create if you wanted to show something like that in your story. And a worm's eye view from below. So he's looking up from underneath this little dandelion, and the dandelion appears to be very big because the worm is small. It could also be just somebody looking up at a building. It just gives a completely different angle. That's a worm's eye view. And then a close-up. Here's one from Harry Potter movie. Some of you might be familiar with him. And we can see by the expression on Harry's face here, there's something serious going on. He's really concentrating and he looks maybe a little bit scared, but they've zoomed right into his face, so his face fills up an awful lot of this frame here. Okay, so close up, zoomed into something is what I'm talking about here. So let's go back for a minute and think about comics. What is a comic strip? So comics are a sequence, that means like one after the other, images of drawings arranged in a panel that link together to form a story. And they can include text. They don't have to, but you can put some text in them if you want. I'm going to show you some examples. So our comic strip examples, I've picked a few simple ones to begin with, and they get a little bit more complicated, and I'd like, as I said earlier, for you to start off with something small and something simpler, and then when you do another story you can add to it and be a lot more adventurous. So here's a little small comic strip. We can see it has 4 boxes, and the first one we have this little character that looks like a mouse knocking on the door, and we see the text here, knock knock. And then in the second one we see the same scene, but he's put his hands behind his back and he's kind of looking up, waiting to see if somebody's going to answer the door. And in the third one, he leans in and puts his ear to the door to see is there anyone actually there that's going to answer the door to him. And then somebody comes out in the fourth one with a mask on, and he gets a big fright. And you can see how he's jumped up off the ground, and the guy inside the house says, "Trick or treat." And I think the mouse was really there to do that, wasn't he? He was doing trick-or-treating for Halloween and he got scared instead of the other way around. So that's a very short little story that's told about this little mouse in 4 boxes. And you can see the drawing in it. There's no colour, it's just in pencil. So you could start off like this, or you could add colour to it afterwards. So let's have a look at another example. So here's another example of a little comic, and this one actually is in colour. And it has text, so the people are talking to each other in it. So in the first one we see a granddad and a little boy, and the boy is saying, "How many times can you make a rock skip across the water, Grandpa?" And then you see how it changes the scene in the second one, and it zooms into the grandpa's, just his head, and we don't see the little boy, we just hear what the grandpa's saying. "Well, let's see, one time I got a rock to skip 23 times, Grandpa says." And in the third one we're back zoomed out again, where we can see half of the little boy and half of the granddad, and the little boy is talking this time, And he says, wow, 23, can you do it again right now? And then we come to the last box and we discover that Grandpa's being a bit funny. And he says, no, I can only skip it that many times when the water's frozen over. So he said he can only do it like that when the lake is frozen. So this is a kind of a funnier, humorous story. And we can see the kind of expression on the little boy's face there. He's looking at him going, and I thought you were going to be able to do it now. He's a bit disappointed maybe. So that's an example of using speech bubbles. So you could use them and colour in your story. Let's have a look at another example. So this one is very colourful and there's no text. So the gist of the story as I get it, it's reading from the top across and down in each row. So we see the toilet roll, we see the guys playing with the toilet roll, and then we realise, oh, actually they're putting this toilet roll all around somebody's house. And then we see inside the room there's a man sitting in his armchair and he looks very cross. He realizes somebody is doing this, so he's going to come out to find out. We see the two boys running away, and then in the next one the man comes to the door and he's very cross looking. And then the two boys escape. Looks like it's maybe their own house, and they're in the door, and then in the next one they're with their backs to the door going, phew, we got away with it. They think they got away with it. And then it comes back to the man and he's outside his house looking at it, covered with all the toilet paper. Now we've got a kind of close-up of him here where you can see him frowning and looking very cross. And then in the last scene, it tells us something else. This is a wide angle. Remember we talked about wide angle before? It's zoomed right out so we can see that there's two houses. One of the houses is the one with the toilet roll on it, and the other house must be where those two boys live because they ran away and got away very fast, didn't they? So it must be his neighbours. So we wonder what might happen next in his story. Do you think he'd be going down to give out? I think he probably is. But they thought they were having a bit of fun. Look at the things in the background as well in some of the pictures. Like we can tell it's Halloween because we see a pumpkin in one of the images. And things like that, okay? So things in the scene in the background are important as well. So this is another example of a simple enough story. But how many boxes has it got? Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 this time. So it took 11 to tell that story. So this is where your stories might start getting a little bit more complicated. Okay, this is a drawing storyboard that was planned for a movie. I think it's one of the Disney movies. And we see a little girl who's like a little fairy, or she's a little tiny girl who's in the grass and she's really, really small. And we see her peeping out through the blades of the grass and looking around. It is only a section, so this isn't a story from start to finish. This is just a little part of the scenes that were being in the movie. So I just wanted to show you an example of something from a movie. And here again is a kind of comic, and this one is about the world's greatest heroes. So we have all the superheroes in it here. We've Batman, we've Superman, we've Wonder Woman. I think they're all in it together here. I'm not going to go through reading all of it. You can have a look at it again yourself if you want to. But notice how this one is laid out. Some of the boxes are bigger than others. Some of them are longer. They have speech bubbles in them. They're colourful. So think about the style that you might like in your story. So I talked about boxes a few minutes ago and how many you might need and layouts. And we saw from the very first story with the mouse that, you know, there was only 3 or 4 boxes in. So the layouts can be very simple or they can be much more complicated, depending on what you're looking for. So your story, as you develop your idea, will determine this. You'll know exactly how many you'll need. And you'll notice with some of these boxes, some of the boxes are long and tall, and then ones are like at different angles. Like this one here, this is where maybe you want bigger scenes. This one here at the start, and then they're small at the bottom. So it's up to you how you want to divide it up, but you can print some of these off. They're attached to this project. If you want to print them and use one of these, you could. So I'm just going to go through the different layouts. So this is a very simple one of 3 boxes. You could draw this easily with your ruler and your pencil yourself, or you could add in 4 if you needed, and they're all exactly the same size. This one here, then, if you wanted a longer story, we have 6 boxes on this one. So these are all available and printable here. This one here has 4 as well, but they're different shape. So maybe your story or your picture suits being turned up this way better than on its side. And then this is when it's divided at the kind of angles and stuff. And even if you liked this one, there's nothing stopping you from printing this and adding more lines into it. You could split this other box. I'm a bit wobbly here now, but you could split this one up here at the bottom into two as well if you wanted to. This one has only three in it, but they give you quite a bit of space and they're unusual kind of shapes, but I think this one's quite nice. And then this one as well. And there's nothing stopping you from having two together. Your story could continue from one page to another. So you could start off with just something with three and then move into something like this. Or this one. Or this one. So there's lots of choice. You can decide if you want to use one of these ones, or you could draw it out yourself and use your ruler, or you can print them off, or you can create your own layout, your own template. So what I want you to think about for a minute is your story. So what the story is going to be about. And you must remember that in creating a story, there must be a beginning and a middle and an end. So think about your story in three different parts. So what's going to happen at the start? How are we going to introduce the characters that you've talked about? What's going to happen in the middle? This is where the activity kind of happens. And how are we going to end the story? What's going to be at the end? Are we going to leave it so there's a kind of a finish to it, or is it going to be that maybe the story could be continued, like the one with the toilet paper around the house? We could have a part two to that, where he goes down and gives out, and the boys have to apologise for putting toilet paper on his house, and maybe they, I don't know, become friends or something. So think about your beginning, your middle, and your end. Now I know there's a lot in this to take in, so there's no rush. Take your time with it. Think about your worksheet from earlier, and then think about this one, the beginning, middle, and end. So this is the other template I've attached to you for you with this lesson, and it's planning your story. And in these boxes here, you can do your little drawings, and you can also write on the lines underneath if you want to write little notes for yourself, and you can decide which way you go. So it goes from this one to this one. Now on this sheet, this is just for planning. This isn't your comic. This is just for working things out and how things are going to look. And you can actually draw little stick men and women and people in these, and things don't have to be drawn perfectly, but it's just for you. Do you remember I was saying to you how to figure out how many boxes you're going to need? So you might even not even use all of this page, or you might end up needing another page. Or you could, if you wanted to, you could split some of these boxes in two and do it this way if you wanted a different shape. Or you could do your angle if you wanted this kind of shape. So it's up to you how you can change this, but it's only for planning, remember, okay? Just for planning. It's not your actual comic. So this is available for you as well to print if you want to. So here's a little example of the planning I did for the first comic we did. Now I didn't draw the comic, but I just did the planning on the sheet that I just showed you there. So I called it the Mouse Halloween Story. So this, if you look at the images from down here and what I've drawn, this is what I'm expecting you to use this sheet for. So just this little stick man knocking at the door. Do you see the way I've done those little lines so we can see that he's making noise? This one relates to here and he's leaning in. So it just tells you what you need to include in your stories. Okay, so now I know I need 4 boxes. I can go and find my layout I want. I can have 4 in a row going across like this, or I could have them underneath each other. So that's just one example. And this would be then the worksheet that goes along with it. So I've decided I'm going to call it, the title is Trick or Treat, the author is D, and I filled in all of the things here. I didn't do any drawings, I just wrote in mouse in a Halloween costume would be one of my characters, and the owner of the house, the person with the mask, would be my second character. Where would it happen, the scene? It's outside the front door on a doorstep. So that's the scene where it's going to happen. The plot is the mouse tries to scare the house owner, but he ends up being scared himself. And when does it happen? I'm thinking, even though it's not in colour, I'm thinking if I was to colour this story takes place at night time, because usually people go trick-or-treating when it's dark. So that would be how you would use the kind of sheets like that. So here is the planning your story for the other comic we looked at with the 4 boxes with the Grandad, and you can see the same way, and I've written underneath each one Grandad and Boy by the water, close up of Grandad, hand to his mouth, Grandad and Boy talking, and Grandad and Boy by the water again. So that would be how you just figure out where you're going to position things, because you have to think about where you're going to put them inside in the box. So this is what it would look like, what you'd have. So complete the 2 worksheets. So these 2 sheets for your planning your story and the one for the who, what, where, when, and then practice drawing your characters. And then you can choose your layout, how many boxes you have, and you can just practice drawing your characters on a blank sheet of paper. And then when you have your layout picked and drawn out, you can start to draw and colour in your own comic and enjoy it, because it's great fun making comics. I just wanted to give you this just to give you a little bit of help with drawing your characters. So these are about body positions, and even though these characters don't have any faces or anything, we can't even tell whether they're boys or girls. Just look at the positions the bodies are in can kind of tell us how the person is feeling. So think about that when you're doing your story. Like we can see this one here. Um, he's got his hands behind his back and foot going out to the side, looks like maybe a bit shy. This one here looks like he's sad. Um, this one here looks like maybe he's dancing. This one, his hands on his hips, looks like he could be a bit angry. That kind of thing. So think about the positions of the bodies. This one here, the shoulders going up. So he's kind of going, sure, no, I don't know what you mean. So think about the body positions. And even if you draw your characters like this, and then you can put the details of the face and the clothes and things in afterwards. Just do simple little characters like this when you're starting off. So just think about the body positions or the gesture. Body language tells us a lot, the way we hold our bodies. I also wanted you to think about facial expressions. If you're putting your faces on your characters, they can convey different emotions. So we can have people that look happy, sad, shocked, we have surprised, we've angry, tired, anxious, serious. So, think about how you're going to create an expression on the face. So I've just shown a few examples from my own students, different classes that I've done this storytelling comics in, and we did ours on superheroes. So this is an example of some of the characters that they developed. So they drew their characters before they started into anything else. So they started off with the idea of their character design and practiced the character. Here's a few more ideas of characters, and they were giving them names, calling them something. So we've Ice Girl, you'll see there in that one. And here's some of my students working out what they're going to do for their comics and working on their actual sheets and their layouts. And here's the comic being worked on, but it's not quite finished on the left, and this is the finished comic on the right hand side. So we can see there's two characters outside a bank, somebody's escaped, and they're using speech bubbles here and text with the imagery, and there's lots going on. Here's another example of another story. I'm not going to read it to you now, but you can see how the same character, this girl with the purple, and she's in a uniform and she's wearing the same things right the way through, so we can recognize her from one box to the next. And then we've this other girl with the long ponytail. Here's another one using the angled kind of boxes, so we can see there's something happening at the zoo. A fox and a gorilla, somebody's flying in the sky, and then they use the last box to just do the end. So that's just some examples of students' work that did with me before. I'd love to see some of your comics that you're going to come up with. I know there's a lot in this to take in, so just remember to use the worksheets, the who, what, where, when, and you're planning your story, and then decide on your layout and putting it all together. You don't have to do it all at the once. Maybe you could do a little bit for maybe for a little half hour each day, and take your time with it and have it as a little project that might keep you going for a couple of days. Send me some pictures. Get an adult to take some pictures, send them to me on email or WhatsApp. I'd love to see what you're going to come up with, and I'd love to be able to share them on social media. And the last lesson that we did was bookmaking, so perhaps if some of you have some books made, you could actually put your comics into some of these books, which would be really cool. So that's it from me for today. Keep in touch. This is Dee from Galway Art Academy. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook. Check out the website, galwayartacademy.com. And there'll be another new lesson coming within the next week. Bye for now.